Hello and welcome to this Nimbus Maps webinar where we're looking at how you can scale your residential property business with property technology. The interesting thing we find here at Nimbus in today's really kind of exciting market is that we see a lot of comments from customers pre-using Nimbus Maps, talking about this sort of stuff. They talk about not being able to find enough opportunities. The opportunities they do find, they say they can't stack up. They say that things are overpriced. They say that where they're looking at opportunities on market, again, they've struggled really to make those things stack up. And where typically those opportunities have any kind of angle to them, where they're looking to make those things stack up, typically that angle is priced into the opportunities, and it really makes life very difficult to be successful in today's marketplace, given the opportunities out there and the way in which these opportunities, when they hit the market, how that kind of manifests itself into this very heated, sort of overpriced marketplace. And we also hear there's multiple bidders bidding for this stuff that's on market in this kind of highly competitive marketplace. Typically what we find is that customers pre-Nimbus Maps, what they tend to run through is they look at stuff, as I say, on market. They'll typically look at things like online tools for things like planning viability. They'll look at planning portals. They'll be trawling through planning policies and looking at those big detailed documents from each of the councils, trying to understand what planning constraints apply to a particular property, or perhaps they're ringing their planner to get some early advice from them. They may be going off to things like land registry to look at ownership and title boundaries and covenants on the site. They may be going to site visits and assessing those sites on the ground, and typically kind of doing two things in that kind of viewing. One is understanding the area that a particular property might sit in, kind of understanding that marketplace, but also then looking at the site itself and the buildings itself that perhaps sit on the site and trying to understand boundaries and physical layouts and that sort of stuff. Often in those viewings, it can be quite hard to find out how big those buildings are. So unless there's a set of particulars that sit alongside these properties, if they're going off market, then they probably haven't got that nice, neat set of particulars. Then often they'll be looking at things like the rates assessments. Perhaps they'll be doing some measurements off things like Google Maps, or dare I say, perhaps a Pro Map or something like that, a kind of an ordnance survey product where they can look at a building size and this sort of stuff. But they'll be working quite hard to find those sorts of opportunities. They'll be typically researching values, so might be looking at things like Rightmove to look at quoting prices for perhaps residential properties and things like that. They'll often be calling a local surveyor, trying to understand those comparables. Often comparables can be quite hard to find, especially commercial ones can be very tricky to understand. So the current process without any kind of supporting technology is really a very manual one. And you can sort of see the various areas where the investor or the developer kind of gets sucked into that due diligence process to really understand these sites before they start committing to them. So with that backdrop painted, what is really quite interesting is that what we see here at Nimbus is this very interesting marketplace. When you take a step back and look at that marketplace that is there, there's kind of this thing for me that is akin to the perfect storm. There's three key things that are all colliding together today that give us this really, really exciting marketplace with this sort of backdrop of this negativity that I've just talked about. That perfect storm is three key things, and those three key things that are happening right here, right now, are of course these. We have a new use class, or we have this new thing called Class E, this commercial use where a lot of buildings have now been lumped in together, where shops and offices and sheds are all now the same thing. There's no change of use between us. They're all now Class E. So these buildings that historically were so different, a shop for me is so different from a factory. They're two completely different buildings, and yet they're the same use class. There's no change of use between those buildings anymore. So this huge shake-up in terms of the way the use class system works. Layered on top of that, we had a round of PD rights post-COVID in 2020, and of course then a further set of PD rights in 2021 as well. So we have this huge wave of things you can now do to these buildings that you couldn't do sort of 2 years ago before COVID hit. And of course, COVID itself, when that hit, that firstly put all the property owners across the UK locked up into their own homes, turned their lives upside down, and the way then that people think as they've been locked up at home for so long, how they feel about their sort of their lives and what their plans are for their lives and this sort of stuff, and therefore how they feel about the investments and the buildings and the building stock that they hold has changed. On top of that, the retailers that trade on the high street and trade from the retail parks on the edge of the settlements and this sort of stuff, their business models have fundamentally changed too. The retailers that are still with us are the ones where they've moved their minds from purely taking a retail unit, filling with stuff and trying to sell stuff out the front door by people that walk past the front of it, into a business where they're managing different channels, where they're managing stuff admittedly through the front door where they're selling to people that come in, but of course they've got heavy online presences where then they're using the logistics arm of their business to then go and service that online traffic in effect. And so the buildings that they wanted from 2 years ago are very different from the ones that they want now. On top of that, the office and kind of the place of the office in the working day has changed enormously, as people now have either working from home sort of setups, or indeed kind of hybrid working patterns where the role of the office and the space that's needed in the office and the facilities that are needed in today's kind of collaborative co-working kind of sort of structure, if you like, is so very different from what they were 2 years ago, where typically the majority of us would get up every day and go into an office somewhere. So all of these things are sort of a kind of working together now to give us this really exciting marketplace where each of these individual of these three things would create a sort of a stir and a change in the marketplace that would create opportunity. That change always creates opportunity in the property market. So what is the opportunity? Well, the opportunity now is to find opportunities in a way that is truly scalable. And of course, an opportunity is only an opportunity if, of course, it stacks up, so it works financially, and if it's on profile where it's in line with what you want to go and do, and of course, if you can get planning consent for that particular building. So when we say stack up, we mean financially and of course in planning terms. Now, the solution to this, and where this all becomes unlockable, if you like, is where we can find, where we look, where we consider where we look, how we search, and of course what we do in that position. So when we start thinking about where we look, there are two places to look in reality, but actually they break up into three component parts. There's the on-market opportunity. So what this is where you've got obviously a for sale or to let board on the outside of a building. You've got an agent instructed, and that would include putting stuff into auction. Or of course you have off-market, and that breaks into two separate areas for us here at Nimbus. The first one is where you have a friendly agent that you've worked very hard with that then is bringing opportunities to you. And the second one then is opportunities that you've dug out yourself. Now, what we think about here is really kind of the positives and negatives around each of those different types, the sort of the three ways in which you might find opportunities. I'm going to take you through those quickly now. So this little kind of table here shows you that the first one is on-market opportunities. And of course, the positive thing about on-market opportunities, you have a willing seller. That person has decided they want to sell that building. And of course, you have open pricing. So they've told you what they want for that building. The challenges with on-market opportunities, of course, is that it's by definition a competitive environment. There's an agent that's instructed whose job is to go and push and try and get as much market exposure to that property as possible, to get as much interest as possible, to try and, if they can, get some sort of Dutch auction going or some kind of competitive bidding situation set up. If there's an opportunity with that, of course, you have to look very carefully about what the opportunity is, and that means you have to work quite hard to work those things out. So you often bring people in, and of course that, if you're not paying them, can burn goodwill, or of course you have to pay them. Of course there's a cost involved in putting those pitches forward. Because it's competitive, there are typically low conversion rates. You don't win every bid that you put in. And of course, when you think about what the structure of that marketplace is, what we're looking at is, of course, if we've got some development opportunity in a particular property, we have a GDV, we've got a sort of a slice of profit that we want as part of that. We have a build cost and a land value. And of course, the whole principle of this is trying to drive the land value, the residual value of that building up as high as possible to win that bid. And of course, there's only three things that adjust in that calculation to give what that value is. Firstly, it's how much can I sell these buildings for? And the person that wins this bid maybe the one that puts the highest number on the top there. And so I think I can sell this more than anybody else can in this marketplace, despite the fact we're all putting the same building into the same marketplace in our appraisal system. Alternatively, they might have a lower build cost, which means that actually, unless I have some particularly competitive way in which I can convert this building or knock it down and rebuild it and convert it cheaper than anybody else, bearing in mind we're all going to the same place to go and buy the same bricks, the same concrete, the same steel, all of those things are exactly the same. So if I'm prepared to put a lower build cost in than anybody else, the question is, well, how are you getting to that lower build cost? Or are you just building a lower specification than anybody else's, and yet you're still putting that into the marketplace that has the same set of comps, the same people out there, it's the same building in the same marketplace fundamentally? Or alternatively, it's the person that's prepared to take the lowest profit margin. So it's the only three things that can affect that: what we're going to sell it for, the GDV, the profit that we take out of it, or of course the build cost. And that all of those things then subtract down to what we pay for this. So the person that wins that on-market opportunity in that competitive environment is either prepared to put a higher build cost, sorry, a higher sales price on that site, a lower build cost, which ultimately we're doing the same work for that particular building, or indeed take a lower profit than anybody else is to. So ultimately, they're just prepared to take more risk than the next person in order to win that particular opportunity. We can find lots of those opportunities, though. We can go off and we can look at various websites. We get to surveying firms' websites. We can look at things like Rightmove and Zoopla and their commercial or residential websites that will help us find those opportunities. If on the other hand, we start looking at off-market opportunities, the first one of those is where we look at sets of particulars. So we have a friendly agent that's gone off and has brought a building to us, maybe with a set of particulars, maybe they're kind of a draft set that sort of before the site goes out onto the market, or indeed maybe it's an early steer that they've given us, and that may have some information that can be useful for us. What's kind of useful for this is that as a developer or an investor that's going out to buy this sort of stuff, you can be very passive. You can sort of sit back and you can wait for these agents to bring these opportunities to you. And of course, they will have sniffed out the fact there's a willing seller there that's kind of considering selling this particular property, and hence having that discussion with them. The challenge with this sort of opportunity, however, is that whilst you can try very hard to brief these agents around what it is you actually want, they will only see what they see. They'll only have the conversations that they have, and they'll only see certain buildings. There'll only be certain buildings that are coming up for sale that they can bring forward to you. So there's no guarantee that the property that comes forward to you is necessarily on profile for what you're looking to do. There's only a limited amount of scale that you can drive into that. There's only so many people that you can look after. There's only so many things that they will see, and of course, there's only so far that work can go. The other side of this as well is that, of course, that person is bringing those opportunities to you because they're expecting to win a fee. And of course, what that means is they only win that fee if you buy that site, in effect. And so if you decide you don't want to buy that site, they still want you to, because they will only get their fee if that's the case. And so that can create this misalignment. And of course, what I tend to find with this particular part of sort of the off-market opportunities, if I start to feel, once I've had 2 or 3 opportunities brought to me by an agent and I've said no 3 times to them, I worry that the 4th one is coming. And so when that 3rd opportunity comes through, and the 2nd opportunity comes through, I feel like I need to perhaps start to say yes to this stuff, start to put some bids in on buildings that I'm not necessarily convinced I necessarily want, even though they're off profile in effect. The final thing around it is that whilst there are agents that will just send an opportunity to you only, what we've typically found is that the very best agents are the ones that always get fees. They always win these deals, win bids in effect. What we tend to find is that the best agents actually have sort of 2 or 3 people they're sending these opportunities to. The reason being, and sort of the reason they're a good agent, is they can generate fees for themselves. And actually what that typically means then is that they will send out that opportunity to sort of 2 or 3 people at the same time, rather than just back one horse from their point of view. If I back 2 or 3, then I've got a much better chance of actually backing the one that's going to go and buy this site, and therefore we get that fee in effect. So we tend to find that actually there is an element of competition within that setup. Excuse me. The way that you find these opportunities is you leverage relationships. So you look after these people. You go out and you try to get their attention. You in effect want to be the very top of their list. You want to be talking to them regularly. You want to make sure that they know what you want, and making sure that when they see that, they send that stuff through to you. The third way of doing this is to access opportunities off market that you dig out yourself. And the way that you do that is you letter campaign. And that's what this sort of third tier is down here in effect. The benefits of this, so in essence, the way this works is you identify opportunities and you send letters out to owners of buildings that you've pre-qualified in effect. The positives around this is that, I suppose, contrary to to this first one over here, these properties are always on profile. There's always, because you're going to pre-screen these first to look at them and say, well, actually, this is the kind of thing I want to go and do. This is where I see the big opportunity for me and my marketplace with my particular sphere of understanding and my experience for particular opportunities. This is where I see the opportunity. Excuse me, sorry. The other sort of benefit to this is that you're going to be tapping into owners of buildings that have particular types of opportunity where they're only just now starting to think about whether they want to sell these buildings, which means that you have time. They haven't necessarily decided they want to sell these opportunities yet, and therefore you can start to get your ducks in a line. You can start to understand where sort of what you need to go and do. In effect, you can typically buy these things subject to planning, because the owners aren't in some desperate rush. There's not somebody else bidding on an unconditional basis, and so you can often buy these buildings subject to planning. That additional time that you get as part of this means that you can then get yourself organized, and when you buy the building or the site, you have it with the consent that you want. This gives you control. This gives you control of that site. You can enter into option agreements, subject to planning deals, and this sort of stuff, where in essence you have control that you'll get the building or the site if you get the consent that you want. And of course, it's completely scalable. You can look as far as you want to. You can find as many opportunities as you want to. And letter campaign is just down to the number of letters that you send out. The negative side of it is that it takes some effort. You've got to go and do something about it. You've got to go and actually send these letters to go and spark this interest, to drive the interest back at yourself and at your business. There's no open pricing. So these owners won't have necessarily taken the advice. You need to kind of educate them around the value of what they've got, and the value and and where that sits relative to the price you're going to be paying yourself, and how that all works. This can also take some time to agree. So there are some drawbacks to this, but of course the benefits are that things are always on profile. You buy buildings with a consent, there's kind of de-risked, and of course the pricing that you agree, and we'll talk about this in a moment, is typically at a price where the scheme stacks up very well, and of course where we can align the owner's interests with our own interests. So for us, the clear winners for this area are, of course, the off-market opportunities. We're going to talk about this more in a moment. So just as a kind of a backdrop to this, I decided to check out with my LinkedIn profile and my LinkedIn contacts what works best for them. So I posted in my LinkedIn feed this question: what works best for you when buying developments, investments, and land? Where do you find them? And I gave people 3 answers that they could say: on market, including auctions; off market via friendly agents; and of course off market, direct to owners, letter campaigning. And what was kind of very interesting and kind of supports what I've been saying a moment ago is that we found that 10% of people were looking on the market and being successful there, but the balance of the 90% of the marketplace are all going off market, and that's split 50-50 between friendly agents and of course direct to owners. And this was off kind of sort of 3,500 people that viewed this post, and about sort of 55-60 that kind of answered that. From our own point of view, we found that off market was a great thing to do. We had a spell pre-focusing on technology where we were doing some property deals, and for us we did this sort of stuff. So this was sort of off market, us doing off market opportunities between about 2014 and 2018, which we've now stopped. But in essence, we did an awful lot of this sort of stuff. This was a property we did up in Burbage, a conversion of a pub to a co-op. Similar this sort of things with Mason's Arms up in Hucknall in Nottingham, where we did this, through to this sort of stuff, Silver Jubilee in Canby Island, where back in those Morrisons are still buying convenience stores. We did about 100 convenience stores over that period, using the similar sort of strategies and approaches I'm going to be talking about that you can use right here, right now, to go and target this sort of stuff for your own opportunities. Did this sort of stuff is La Castilla in Farnham in Surrey, where we did this, and of course then a whole load of this sort of stuff where we were doing residential schemes, and of course this sort of residential scheme too. This was all just applying simple strategies to off-market estates of properties, typically for us, either retailers or pub companies, and driving some big values off those sites. There's some bigger stuff as well, this sort of stuff, which was sort of a combination of on and off market. And the impact of that for us was kind of really interesting over that sort of very short period that we got retained by Punch Taverns, Admiral Taverns, we got retained by Sainsbury's and Co-op too. This was an extract from the Estates Gazette where it was looking at the change of use of pubs from typically a whole bunch of our clients here. And we can see this big spike here, which sort of ties in line with that 2014 to 2018 period when we were doing this sort of stuff. And you can see that sort of big spike in this very efficient way of taking a strategy, targeting specific properties, and then unlocking those where they worked and focusing and really refining your efforts into the right places. It also ended up in some big high-profile sales of some big PLC companies as well. We've got a whole bunch of customers that are doing exactly this, and there's some really interesting stories I love hearing. We have lots and lots of customers saying things like this about sites that they've found using these strategies where that sort of first slide that I showed, we have these problems around things not stacking up. These people that are applying the strategies that we're talking about right here, right now, are really not feeling those same problems that we've talked about with things being overheated, because they're searching in the right place, they're finding the right opportunity, they're driving the right actions, which then drive the right opportunity back at their business, and they have the simple solution to then go and unlock these opportunities. And that also mirrors itself on our Trustpilot page with some pretty high rankings that we have on there. So what are those strategies you can apply? Well, there's two kind of things I'm going to be showing you. Firstly, the 8 ways to find land with a tool called Nimbus Maps Elite, and I'm going to show you that later on. But these are some of the ways in which we can find that. But of course, with today's particularly hot market with these new PD rights, the things I want to focus on today are in effect these. So when it comes to residential opportunities, we have residential land opportunities, residential airspace opportunities, and with the new PD rights that are out there, this new raft of PD rights and this new use class that sits on the property market, this is where it becomes most exciting. So firstly, up here we have Class ZA. This is where you can knock down commercial buildings and rebuild them as residential with 2 stories on top as blocks of flats. We have residential development plots where you can take individual houses with big gardens, where you can knock them down and rebuild them as houses of a higher density, if you like. And of course, low value commercial property where you can knock them down and rebuild them as residential on those sites too. And then a bunch of airspace opportunities above blocks of flats, the new Class A, AA and AB, and of course, airspace above houses with the AC and AD. On top of that, so often we'll look at converting commercial buildings because of the lower value typically that the commercial building has relative to the residential values that are there. And of course, there's this new change of use for the Class MA that you can apply to. I'm going to focus on that in a moment. Don't forget things like Class G PD rights, which was the old shops with uppers, where you could take a retail unit with and convert 2 flats above that in the commercial space above a retail unit. That's been extended now to cover the whole of Class E on top. In addition to that, again, we can apply low value commercial buildings and convert those, and of course Class ZA. And there's also things like HMOs that can also be kind of interesting in today's marketplace with that particular type of with those particular PD rights that are in place. For me today, I want to talk about Class MA. I'm going to talk about Class MA and Class ZA and look at some plots and just kind of bring to life how this works for you. But in the case of Class MA, this is what Class MA is all about. We can look at Class E commercial buildings. This is the new broader use class that covers things like shops, industrial buildings, and of course offices, this new kind of broader use class. The buildings that are less than 1,500 square meters, so just under 16,000 square feet, then for us, provided they have a residential feel to that location, then we can start to think about Class MA and converting those buildings into residential. With Nimbus and this Elite Plus system I'm going to show you in a moment, what we've done is we've excluded the things where the planning policy would disapply this new PD right in effect. So things like Article 2.3 land, you can't apply Class MA in Article 2.3. So that's been removed from our system. Things like scheduled monuments, listed buildings, flood zones 2 and 3. Again, you can't apply Class MA to those things. So what does all this mean? Well, ultimately, there's a number of strategies we can apply. I'm going to show you a few of those in a moment, but I've been through in sort of simple detail what some of those strategies might be for you. That's all fine, but what does that mean for you, and how do you go and get the benefit that that we've been talking about a moment ago? Well, the answer is that first off, you have to find 100 opportunities. Once you've found 100 opportunities, the simple thing to do then is write 100 letters to those owners. And there's some tools within Nimbus I'm going to show you in a moment that's going to make that really simple for you. We're going to talk about mail mergers and stamp and doc mail and this sort of stuff. Of the 100 letters that you send, typically you get about 8 responses back. So the 100 letters go out, 8 people come back to you and saying thanks for the letter. Of the 8 responses that come back, typically you'll get half that say no, I don't want to start my building right now. And when I hear no, I'd hear no, not yet. I'd put them on a list and I'd send them another letter in 6 months' time and say, I'm still here. Are you interested now? I wrote to you 6 months ago. You said no then, but has anything changed for you? The balance of the 4 that are left, so from the 8 that we had 4 to say no, 4 will say maybe. And what we want to see with those, we want to go and see those people, we want to go and see the sites, we want to go and talk to them about that. And what we typically find is a deal to be done within those 4. And what we see when we go and see those people is it's a simple pre-qualification process. Ultimately, at some point, we want to ask this magic question, which is, what's the minimum price that you'd accept to sell your building and still be happy? Because ultimately, that gives us a target in terms of the offer we're going to go and put forward and a way of structuring the purchase from them, in effect. So our target is 100 sites. 100 sites translates to 100 letters. 100 letters translates to 8 responses. Of those, they're split 50-50 between no's and maybes, and of the maybes, we then close one of those deals. So let's go and see this in action just very briefly. Let's just go and run through that. So this is the Nimbus Maps Elite Max system. So I'm going to start off with somewhere like Watford, I think, as today's example. So let's just bring up the Nimbus Maps system. So the first thing I want to understand around Watford is the quality of this area. I want to understand which parts of Watford are good, which parts are bad, because I'm going to build a nice new scheme of houses in that location. I need to know that it's a decent location. So we have this thing called location analysis, and here we do a number of very clever things. We can look at things like planning, we can see planning applications shown on the map, we can see council boundaries, we can do some searching for planning permissions and this sort of stuff. We can lay a planning policy on the map, so we can look at things like flood zones and listed buildings. We can check the council housing delivery test. Are they meeting their housing delivery test? Are they providing their 5-year housing land supply or not? Where the green belt sits, where conservation areas are, AOMB, triple SI, all those kind of things can also be shown. We can see comparables on the map. We can see commercial and residential comparables, but I want to start off with the market. I want to understand across Watford where the strong parts are and where the weaker parts are. What we can see in Watford is this is showing me neighbourhood boundaries with average sales prices of residential properties across the map in effect. So what I can see in central Watford, average sales price of £427 a foot. As I go north up to here, I get sort of £476 a foot. Northwest, I get some stronger values, so nearly £500 a foot. And as I go southwest, I get this sort of pocket of much stronger value, sort of around Rickmansworth and just down to the southeast of sort of around Batchworth Park Golf Club. I get even stronger values and sort of Croxley Green and places like that. So very quickly, I can see where I should be targeting, where I'm going to find decent opportunities. I can do some other stuff around residential feel, so residential yields, and I can go into real granular information around deprived areas and all that kind of good stuff. But I can also test to say, is there an HMO marketplace in the area? So when I'm starting to look at schemes in that area, what are my exits and how can I understand what the right exit is for those areas? So I've got a clear understanding now. There's an HMO marketplace in Watford, but equally there's some good parts up in the north and some good parts out to the west, and certainly down here as we go sort of away from Watford down to Rickmansworth, those values creep up and go much higher. So I now know where to search. So the first thing I want to understand is I want to now start looking for particular types of opportunity. How do I get 100 sites that I can then go and write to 100 owners to go and get myself through that process, to go and get my 4 hot leads that I'm then going to go and close one of those deals from? Well, the way we can do that is a thing called Elite Plus. So what I want to show you here is sort of 2 or 3 ways in which we can apply some of those new PD rights, those new strategies to find particular buildings. And I'm going to start off with Class MA, as we said. So what I can do is I can click on the particular type of PD right I want to go and apply. The system goes off and it finds me particular buildings where those PD rights apply. So if I kind of zoom in, I'm going to just pick out anything at random, actually. Let's just kind of zoom right in. Let's just see what we've got. So let's have a look at this particular property. It's now plotting me some freehold ownership as well. We'll just switch that off in a second. This is saying here there's a 4,000 square foot shop on this little street down here that that could be interesting. There's something down here too, which is a little classy office. Let's have a look at this one. Let's go here actually. So when I click this particular property, what I can see is that it's 3 and 5 Tall Pits Lane, Watford. In essence, what I can do, in fact, let's get rid of some of these, makes it a bit clearer for you. So this is showing me down here as a particular property. It's saying that it's an office, Class E office. It's saying sales price in this area £520 a foot. So if I convert this particular office building, I'm going to achieve £671 a foot for the, £671,000 as a sale price for it. It's allowing £115 a foot conversion cost. And it's saying this particular office has a rental level of about £12 per square foot. Applying a 6% net initial yield for that means it's worth about £190 a foot. So in reality, the building's worth about 250 grand. There's £140,000 worth of conversion cost in for about 400 grand, and it's worth then 670 as a converted building. Now, of course, what that gives me is a 70% return on cost. That's way higher than I need as a developer. I need about 25% return on cost to make this thing stack up. So what now becomes interesting is that if I write a letter to this owner and say, would you be interested in selling, perhaps all or part, and having that kind of open conversation with them, what I know is that the value of the building is broadly speaking 190 quid a foot. If I buy it for 190 quid a foot, I make 70% return on cost off the scheme. Now, the interesting thing about that, the interesting thing about that is, of course, if I really am targeting 25% return on cost, there's 45% return on cost that's super profit for me. So I'll just grab a quick drink. Now that extra return, of course, I can either take myself as a higher return, or perhaps I can share it with the owner, which means I can then afford to pay more than the building's worth to unlock this. Apologies, sorry, I've got a frog in my throat. Apologies. So in essence, the way I can align that owner with my own plans is to say to them, you have a building here that's worth £250,000. And I can use the comparables within Nimbus to go and see what those buildings are, and explain to them why it's worth £250,000, why £190 a foot is the right number. And I can show them a number of buildings that are on the market or that have recently sold that are in office use to explain that. And I can then say, well, actually, how about if I paid you £300,000 for that? And if I paid you £300,000 for that, would you sell it to me? Do you need the money now, or do you need the money in due course? And is it more important for you to have the very highest price out of this site, or is it important to get the money now? And so as part of that pre-qualification process, I can understand that. Then the offer that I put forward then is, if they say they want the highest price, well, if you want the highest price, the way we do that is we work together and I go and get a planning consent and I buy it from you from subject to planning. Excuse me, this frog's back. So ultimately, the trick to this is sharing some of that extra profit with the owner, creating in effect, in their heads, a joint venture, some sort of solution whereby they sell it with the benefit of planning consent for a value that's higher than the existing use value. And this we see in various areas. Again, over here, there's another similar thing over here, a little Class E garage, 2,500 square feet. This is only worth £70 a foot. It's a 180% return on cost. If we convert that, it's a much bigger building. It's got much higher values. I'm here to access it through here and sort of redevelop in the back here. Again, it's a Class E, a Class E building that Class MA would apply to. We've checked the various things around all that. And of course, I could be even more aggressive with this. I've got 180% return on cost on this one. I can really pay, well over the asking price for that. So that's all fine. We've found a number of buildings. And of course, my target is 100 opportunities. And of course, as I sort of look around this very small part of Watford, I have a shop here that would convert. I have another shop on the corner there. Again, these are all Class E buildings. I have something over here, a vehicle repair shop, 800 square feet, that has a 71% return on cost over there. And so another vehicle repair shop here, again, 90% return on cost. So very quickly, I can find an awful lot of opportunities that stack up financially and stack up in planning terms. So the simple thing then is to go and write some letters. So what I do for this, I click on this little button here. That brings this thing called the information panel out. This is showing me is the servicing garage, the old B1 use, now a Class E use. And what I can then do is add this thing to a thing called workflow. What I do with that is I select the stage I want to put in. I've got a Class MA opportunities section here that I put in, and I can just put in my little note here, just saying whatever it is I want to kind of to label as that particular opportunity. It puts a pin on the map for me and saves it to this thing called workflow. Now, where workflow becomes very useful is that as soon as I've built up 100 of these opportunities, and I found 4 or 5 in the last the last couple of minutes, then what I can do is I can download that to Excel. And that's this little button up here. So what that does is it takes this whole workflow out and puts it into Excel for me. And in that Excel file, I have the owner's name and the property address and the owner's address too. From there, I can mail merge a letter to all those owners in that list of 100 that I've saved into this Class MA opportunities. And from there, that's where I can get that feedback from them, that sort of inbound interest from them. My letter, when I send it, is a very soft letter, and it's a real letter, but it's a soft letter. So the simple way of doing that is you're writing a letter to say, I've done some research on your property. Apologies for this assisted approach, but I've done some research on your property. And I think it could be ideal for the kind of opportunity that I'm looking for. If you have any plans to dispose of all or part, I'd be delighted to hear from you. Here are my contact details. Kind regards, yours sincerely. Off you go. So it's a very light, very simple letter, just provoking that response back from the owner. And it's very simple then. All you've got to do is go and find a number of those opportunities. Those are shown straight in the map like this through the Elite Plus system. We have a number of other strategies. So we could do Class MA, I've just shown. We could do perhaps even Class ZA. Let's have a look and see what we can find for that. Let's just zoom out and have a look at some of those. Excuse me. For the Class ZA opportunity, so what have we got here? We've got an old excuse me, an old surgery here, which I think is probably actually an old office use, actually, which is kind of why it's bringing that. In fact, sorry, it's a D1 use, so into Class E, and off we go. And so again, I can go and knock that down and rebuild that as a block of flats. Again, over here, something similar, a little office building here as well that has the same PD rights that can apply to it too. And so off the back of this, what I'm trying to show is just how simple it is to go and find an awful lot of opportunities to go and convert buildings or to knock them down and rebuild them as flats using the Elite Plus or Max system. So the other stuff we might do is we might look at perhaps things like where do we find development plots? So where do we find houses or sort of low density houses where we could then go and redevelop them and put more units onto them. So this is what this little overlay here is showing me in effect, is that there's a building here that's got an extra bit of space around it in effect. So could I extend that or do something more clever with it? Excuse me, apologies. And what it often does is sort of highlights locations where we have this sort of opportunity here, I suspect, where what you can see is that sort of the general built space on a title like this is this sort of building. And of course, what we have here is a very small building. And in fact, the same on the one next door. So these sites typically probably can be split in half and put 2 onto them with a much bigger building footprint in effect. And we tend to find this is quite a useful way of searching, is sort of seeing these underdeveloped sites. Again, sort of down here, where we could perhaps put something in the side here in effect. So a number of very quick ways in which we can find these opportunities. And I suppose what I would like to challenge you next is to say, well, actually, what if you sent more than just 100 letters? What if you sent 200? What if you sent 300? What about 400 letters? This is where the way in which you tap into these opportunities is so simple now. It is so simple to find truly scalable ways of finding the front of putting enough opportunities into your hopper on the front end of your business to then send enough letters out to drive enough interest back at your business to find the number of sites that you want. And of course, what you're able to do with these opportunities is you're able to pay more than the building's worth to the owner. So the what that does is it aligns you and them together, so you're now focused in the same place.